All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Safety Last. So, I have the first repeat guest. How are you doing, Chris? And how do you
Good.
feel about being the first repeat guest?
I'm actually honored. I'm going out with friends later tonight, and they asked me why I couldn't come for an earlier pregame, and I said, "Well, I'm appearing on a podcast,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so yeah, they'll all be listening too."
Yep. You put this on your resume. This is actually probably. I'm not sure if it's an insult to be the first repeat guest of my podcast. You probably have to find more things to do. The fact that you're back on, but I'm glad to have you back on, and let's talk about today's topic, which is I've just noticed more of a anti-capitalist message in films, and I was just thinking about like who can I talk about this to, and and your name popped up, and I was like, oh, I can talk about this with Chris. And I sent you a message, and I said, with films like Parasite or Nomad's Land, sorry, there just seems to be this wave that criticizes the economic structures. But I did jump ahead of myself, and I did tell myself before we jump into this, I would like you to say a few things in French, like you did last time. So, are you ready to
All
accept
right.
this challenge?
Yes, I'll do my best.
Okay. First thing I want you to say is I am about to go shopping later and I need to buy some food.
Je vais aller magasiner plus tard et j'ai besoin d'acheter de nourriture.
Ah, that's such a pleasant language, man. All right. Second thing, we'll do three. Second thing I'd like you to say is I've run out of chewing gum. Can I have some of yours?
Oh my! I don't actually know how to say chewing gum, but I think it's
Can you say
gum.
lolly?
I can go with candy. Yeah, j'ai pas plus de bonbons. Puis-je avoir une de la vôtre?
You know what's interesting? You could say you could have said I like beating people, and I would have no idea because I don't speak a lick of French. Okay, last thing before we jump into this to this podcast is, could you say I'm appearing on the best podcast ever, and I love it.
Ok. Je serai sur le meilleur podcast de tout le monde et je l'aime beaucoup.
Oh, Chris, you didn't have to say that. How nice of you. Okay, cool, man. I appreciate that. So let's.
Well. Excuse me here. You're actually really putting me on the spot because last time I showed this podcast to my sister, whose French is, I would say, is a little better than mine, and
Mhm,
she made a
mhm.
point of saying I didn't actually say it is raining. I said the sky was crying, and I was like, oh no, this is so
Wait,
embarrassing.
that's so much more poetic. I would much prefer you to say the sky's crying
Oh,
than it's raining. But
yeah.
I guess isn't that just what rain is if you think about it?
I
I
guess I
guess just the
panicked.
sky crying. um, that's yeah, I completely understand that. I am in this like philosophy book club, which
Hmm.
started because of the lockdown in Sydney. And every week we read Carl Jung's book called Axon. No, Aeon. Aeon, sorry. I forgot the name of the book. It's called Aeon. And there was this discussion about danger and opportunity. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Chinese word, Wei Shen, I believe that's how you pronounce it,
Hmm.
contains both danger and opportunity. So for the Chinese, these two ideas are synonymous. So danger is accompanied by opportunity, and opportunity is accompanied by danger. And I told them that fact, and they're like, "Oh, that's really cool. How do you say it?" And my reaction's like, oh Lord, I know this fact, but I forgot the name." So I said something which was somewhat close, and I searched it up, and I was like, "Oh, that's not the word," but I was too embarrassed to tell them so. So next week, I'm just going to drop it, like name drop it, and say the actual right version, and then they won't know because none of them speaks Chinese, and
Right, right.
my reputation is good.
Intact.
Hmm. So I thought we'd jump into this week's idea or this week's podcast, which is a growing anti-capitalist trend within, you could say, social media, or you could say social movements like Black Lives Matter and stuff like this, which have some
Mhm,
association with anti-capitalism,
mhm.
and also how this manifests itself in film and literature. Because to me, it's quite strange that Hollywood or even South Korea, which is quite capitalist, would produce these films in a capitalist system through capitalist means, which tend to address or deconstruct capitalism. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah. First take was when you mentioned this to me and asked me to do this. I was like, yeah, this sounds something that's super interesting to me because I've had a similar sentiment. Obviously, with Bong Joon Ho coming into, I guess, the spotlight of late, like a lot of Korean filmmakers, like Lee Chang Dong, or the man who did Burning.
Uh huh. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah,
I was
or
about to mention that as well.
yeah, yeah, and Old Boy, or the Vengeance trilogy also has some undertones of like this class thing going on, and of late, once again, like you mentioned, wait, I have notes here. Yeah, so Sorry to Bother You, for example, was one I really enjoyed of late. This was in a Hollywood film, and I too agree. I've been seeing a lot of this, so yeah, excited to chat about it.
The first time I really noticed this, because it has been this idea which is touched base with me and then left, and then touched back with me and then left. But when I realized in 2019 Parasite won or just like swept a lot of the Oscars, which by the way, Asian Twitter went crazy when that
Hmm.
happened. By the way, so shout out to Asian Twitter. When Parasite won, it they won the Oscars, and then in 2020, Nomadland won Best Pictures as well. So when I saw that, my reaction was, wait, these are 2 years in a row where the films criticize the economic structures and economic inequality. And for anyone who hasn't watched Nomadland, actually, Chris, have you watched Nomadland?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, do you want to give us a bit of a summary?
Yeah, it's filmed almost as though it was a documentary. Like the style is very realistic, I would say, and the lighting is very like I don't know, something like Malik would do. It's very a lot of natural lighting. It's very pretty, and it follows a woman who is has been displaced from her original home where she owned property because it became a ghost town, and she basically lives in like a camper van and has been traveling across the United States, picking up work where she can, including like Amazon fulfillment sites, and yeah, just documents her life and her journey in like middle America, I guess.
And I would say this film also deconstructs this idea, which has been a big part of the American consciousness, which is meritocracy. The idea that if you work hard, you try hard, you put yourself out there, then you will succeed. The rules of America or the rules of capitalism allow those who work hard or who have the best ideas to naturally move up. And this seems to contradict that because she's obviously a hard worker. She, at one point, goes to this government employee and says, I want to work. Please give me work. And the government employee says, I'm unable to do so. I just don't have that ability to give you work right now because of the economy. And it just zooms into the life of this smaller individual. And it seems to show what happens when you end up on the margins of society. And for her, it seems like it's both a cultural marginalization because she's quote unquote homeless, she's in a van moving left and right. And also, there's an economic marginalization. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I do want to clarify a point. You mentioned the American ideal of like meritocracy, and so I obviously am from Canada, and I think that idea still permeates to the northern side of the border. That like the meritocracy, there's a lot of belief in it in Canada as well. Do you want to expand on that? It's like as like the West believes in some meritocracy as well. Like, is that also prevalent in Australia? I'm just curious,
So
actually.
I do think it is prevalent in Australia. However, I would say it seems to be less prevalent in European countries, which
Hmm.
have more of a socialist economic structure and a socialist leaning. So, because of that, I was a little hesitant to say West. And it's not like these ideas don't exist in Japan or in Asia or in
Hmm. Hmm.
certain parts of the Middle East. So, I do think it is a common idea, but I just think it's more prevalent in America. And you could say Canada. And with Europe, I don't think it's as strong. Oh, what do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think like obviously America has the most undiluted form of this ideal, and I think it's definitely not as strong in Canada or in Australia, and yeah, and once again, much less so in non English speaking Europe. And yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, I just wanted to touch on that briefly, but I guess back to your question about the American dream and meritocracy, and I think I agree because I forgot what the woman's name in the film was. It Pam?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, okay, yeah. Well, like you mentioned, she was a hard worker, and she also has this pride about her, right? Like there have been many times when her family or that man she met asked her to settle down and just stop moving, and she wanted to be self reliant. She wanted not to have to depend on someone. And I think within that, there's also a bit of the American dream or the idea of meritocracy where she wants to be her own person. And if you're not, if you're taking what she might have considered handouts, then you know you lose your livelihood, you lose your sort of your sense of person. So I think that's maybe in a sense that was one of the takeaways I had from it, where you have these people who are unwilling to seek this sort of help or unwilling to seek what they perceive as charity, like middle America who votes very red. Like that's what it is.
Hmm. I completely agree with you. And it is interesting that those states, which generally tend to be poorer, vote Republican, and which is generally against social handouts or social benefits, etc., like that. There was one point in the film that really struck me, which is you go from the main character, who I think we said her name is Pan or Pam or something like that. She is seen struggling in society, so she's unable to get work. And then it transitions, and I'm not sure if you remember this, but it transitions to her on tour. And she's being led by a tour guide who's just explaining the stars. Do you remember this scene?
Yes, was it? And there was a dinosaur. Was that it?
Exactly, yep.
Yes. Okay.
And to me, it was so interesting because you see this woman just almost being exploited for her labor. She works a job, but it's not enough to actually provide anything. And it also brings up images or stories of people who work like two or three jobs and they still can't really pay for the essentials. And on the other hand, the tour guide says something which really stuck out to me and something that I believe, which is the stars up there, those atoms and those chemicals are what formed you. And obviously, the main character listening to that, that would apply to her. So she is obviously made of stardust, which is a pretty popular metaphor, a pretty popular
Hmm.
image that a lot of people have heard of before. But
Hmm.
it was so interesting to me that that's true, and yet this collection of stardust just basically can't find a place to live. So this contrast between like the magic of life, but also how dehumanizing the working system is, really struck me in that scene.
Yeah. How recently did you watch Nomadland?
It was around, I think it was around 3 months ago, and
Okay.
I actually recorded a podcast about No Man's Land by myself. I haven't released it just because I realized that I think if I just speak for 30 minutes, people will get bored and they'll fall asleep. So that's why I said, let's actually bring someone else and get you to contradict or agree with my ideas and hopefully get some a variety of thoughts.
Yeah, no, but I was just thinking that you were a that stuck with you for 3 months, and even though it wasn't as poignant for me, well, having watched it over half a year ago, that I still was able to remember it. I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that it was quite powerful.
And do you think there is a growing trend in Hollywood to talk about these issues? And do you just think it's a part of a larger movement, such as Black Lives Matter, just worker strikes, um, even Greta Thunberg? I think in a way,
Hmm.
even her climate change policies, her climate change talks, and her activism seems to be attacking the economics that produce such waste or that put money over the environment. Do you think this is just a general surge in a certain direction where, because of the mood of people, you get films like Snowpiercer, which you mentioned before, comes from the same director of Parasite, and then Nomadland, and then other films. I think it's a film or a TV series. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a film called Us, I think.
Yes,
Um,
yes, that was a film. Yes,
yeah,
Jordan Peele.
and yeah, exactly. And what was interesting, I was listening to some other person talk about it on YouTube, and so the title is called Us, but if you read it out loud, it's US.
Hmm.
So is that a commentary on the United States?
Wow. So I think there was a lot there. Well, so to address your first question, once again, I do think there has been a shift towards more blatantly anti-capitalist films. So in the vein of Us, like the Korean films you mentioned, Sorry to Bother You, Nomadland, and I think there has always been this anti-business person, anti-Wall Street sentiment that's been very prevalent, right? Like you've have Wall Street, The Big Short, Wolf of Wall Street, um like I don't know, even in like Jurassic Park, like business bad, or like
Avatar,
district.
you could say.
Yeah, yeah, there's always been this generally, these undertones have always existed, but now it's like front and center. Like the premise of the movie is like very clearly class sort of warfare, and like for example Us is like, yeah, it was brilliant. And I think I don't know if, once again, if my viewing of Us necessarily was correct, but I viewed it as, because you have the regular family, and it's a black family, and they have a cottage, and their friends are white, and in my head, the way I viewed it was that it's to call out the wealthy African Americans who have who have just essentially, for lack of a better term, forgotten about their people. And once again, as an African American, obviously I have no grounds. Sorry, as someone who's not a part of the community, I have no grounds to making sort of statements. But like that's the way I view that film, and like everyone else who's forgotten and the underclass.
You know what's
So
interesting? Sorry, go on.
mhm. No, 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 they go for it.
You know what's interesting? These ideas of people moving up a ladder, a
Hmm.
hierarchy, and then forgetting about their identity or their demographic also exist in Asian culture or Asian communities. I mean, this is not particularly strange because the Asian community is so large, but there seems to be some sort of resentment, and I don't think it's particularly wrong, between Southeast Asians and East Asians, where
Hmm.
East Asians get so much more media representation, and Taiwanese, Japanese, Koreans tend to just earn more money,
Hmm.
whilst Southeast Asians have, I would say, a generally worse media representation and also tend not to be as affluent. And there seems to be some tension there as well.
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree, and I think it's very, once again, for many people who might have been in the West, or just racism, Asian is just Asian, but like in Asia, there's also this very distinct like racial sort of hierarchy, that this very racist system, and it's where Asians from, like you mentioned, Asians from Southeast Asia are viewed as lesser, and it's reinforced by the fact that Southeast Asian countries as a whole are poorer, and many of them of people from those countries will work in the more affluent countries as domestic laborers, as immigrant workers, just reinforcing this sort of stereotype. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
And in Hong Kong, for example, a lot of the maids and servants, do you know what nationality they are?
I would assume Filipino or Filipino.
Yep. A lot of them, or almost all of them, are Filipino. And I was actually speaking to a friend, and she said, she was commenting on BTS, and she said part of BTS success is, well, I guess they're good songwriters and stuff, but they are East Asian. They have pale skin, and they've been able to almost blend into this idea that white skin or pale skin equals better. Like, try to imagine BTS if they were like super dark Vietnamese people or Indonesian people. It's just harder to imagine because there's almost this idea that East Asia, and I'm not sure if it's correct, maybe it is incorrect, but with K-pop and stuff, they can almost blend into these pre-established ideas of what beauty is.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure this is if this is what you're driving at, but I would caution to like differentiate between the idea of pale skin being beautiful as one thing, and as pale skin being beautiful because it is adjacent to Caucasians. I'm not sure if that was what you were driving at, but like I've heard lots of people make this sort of claim, and I feel like pale skin in in various Asian societies has always been considered a sign of beauty because you don't have to work in the fields, you stay inside. Even in like South Asia, even in like in India and Pakistan, people with paler skin were considered more beautiful for because they were aristocracy. They call it less tanned. But yeah, I do agree. I do agree with that, and I think it's well, I don't know. Blackpink has Lisa in it, so we have that going for Southeast Asia.
But she's, from what I know, her skin is pretty pale, right?
Yeah, I don't actually watch that much K-pop, but yeah, I would figure yes, probably
Mm.
to appeal to Korean society. I learned.
Hmm. So let's get back to the previous comments with things like Snowpiercer and Parasite and Us and all these other films which seem to contradict or criticize the capitalist system. Is it ironic that Hollywood and South Korea are creating these films? Like, is there a sense of performative aspect to it? So these films criticize the economic structures, but yet they seem very ingrained into it. Is there a sense of irony there, or are they trying to do the best that they can do?
Well, I'd actually love to get your thoughts on this too, but mine are. I think that they're important, even though they work within this capitalist structure, this sort of film industry. I think they are. Some of them are a little more independent. They're by lesser known directors, and it's like that owning liberals thing. Like, oh, where are you tweeting these anti-capitalist memes from? Your phone, your iPhone,
Mm-hmm.
those made by
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, get owned liberals. Like I think even if you're within the system, you have to find a way to make a protest, right? And you're already trapped in the system, and I think it's perfectly valid to use the apparatus that is already there to make your point.
I agree with that, and I do think there is a performative aspect to it because these
Hmm.
Hollywood films can take the moral high ground by criticizing capitalism. It's really like Apple, or actually, I saw this when I was in Europe and it stuck to me. There was this bank which was celebrating, I forgot the name of the bank, but it was in London somewhere. And they were celebrating gay marriage by putting like two gay men holding hands, opening up like a bank loan together.
Hmm.
And I just remember thinking, like, this company has completely stolen and assimilated ideas of marriage equality into this economic structure. So I do think companies do purposely try to do this. They take on these social movements like Pepsi. I'm not like Ferguson or Milwaukee or wherever those riots
Yeah,
were. It showed um is it Kendall Jenner or Kylie Jenner,
I
one
think it
of
was
the
Kendall. Yeah,
Kardashians, and she was drinking Pepsi or giving it to like a riot police. And in reality, those riot police were beating people's ass. So it was just such a contrast. And I do think some companies, some Hollywood films, some directors do want the moral high ground by pushing that message, but not really being against the system. That being said, everything you said, I do agree with, which is there is no way to really produce a film that or produce art that gets so mainstream without relying on some parts of the economic system.
yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying too, with the idea of corporations like sort of co-opting these movements. Like I have a lot of quite leftist friends everywhere, and one of them posted a soundbite a while back where it was like, environmentalism without class consciousness is just gardening, and I'm like, honestly, you see enough you see enough stuff that's greenwashed as to be environmentally friendly. That's definitely true. But yeah, well, yeah, but I feel like lots of these films still are like, I don't know. I think once again, Bong Joon Ho is quite well known, but even then, most of his entire portfolio has been very like Snowpiercer, Okja have all been kind of anti-capitalist. Chloe Zhao, I had not even heard of before Nomadland,
Hmm.
but
Same here.
she sold out tomorrow though, so she's directing the Eternals.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I think once again, like my perspective is that these are independent artists trying to get their point across, maybe trying to open some people's eyes to what's going on out there. In along the way, a big studio picks it up, but that just means more exposure, and yeah.
And do you think this wave of anti-capitalist films will continue? Because for me, and I'd love to get your opinion as a Canadian who lived right above America, but it seems like the internet's shift to the right really peaked with Donald Trump's election. Almost like the internet was like, haha, let's just get this random dude in. And then it really peaked around 2016, 2017. And even Trump, in my opinion, seemed to ride this anger towards the economic and political elites, such as Clinton, who have been in power for like, 20, 30 years with Bill Clinton and then Hillary Clinton afterwards. Even he seemed to channel this anti economic or anti politically elite anger. But ever since then, you just don't see these haha feminist wrecked YouTube montages that you would see everywhere from 2015, 14 to 16 and 17. It seems like with the rise of left wing channels on YouTube or even Greta Thunberg and these figures, whether it's ContraPoints, there seems to be a move against it. So, firstly, do you think there is a shift on the internet towards the left? And also, what do you think that means for the change in cinema? Do you think cinema will continue this trend of being critical to capitalism?
Hmm. Yes. So to address your first point, I think you've always the internet has always been dominated by like men sitting in their parents' basements, and I think that always tends to lean right, and
Hmm.
you have a couple tankies here and there, but I think once again, like you mentioned, I think it's recently with maybe it's because the younger generation is getting on the internet and starting to produce content, more politically aware content. Younger generation that has realized that the system has failed them effectively. That they can work and probably will never own property in their lives. Have pushed this to the forefront. And short answer is yes, I do agree. I think I've seen a lot more content, and I think it's affecting me too. I think I've become a lot more left leaning of late as a result of consuming all this content. and yeah, and to address your point about movies, I'm not sure. I think 2 points right now. 2 points isn't necessarily a trend yet between the two best pictures, but you do have there, and I think there's like little. There are fewer anti-capitalist movies coming out of Hollywood these days than your Marvel big pictures, your Star Wars reboots, your Fast and Furious. But like I mentioned earlier, there's always been this sort of undercurrent of businessman bad, Wall Street bad, and I think that it's shifting towards more blatant, obvious representations of the class divide is a good thing, and I don't see it necessarily picking up, but I don't necessarily see it going away anytime soon either.
Mm. I am just trying to think of films like Wolf of Wall Street, or even I don't know the name of this film, but I know the saying, which is "always be closing." Do you know the name of that film?
Yes. Oh, Glengarry Ross, something like that.
Something, yeah, something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And just to me, like that film, if it came out today, would just be so culturally out of place.
Oh my
Like
god.
it just feels so 90s, like um, Ronald Reagan,
Yes.
Reaganomics. It just completely feels like from that era. And there's one scene in particular, like I've seen scenes of this on YouTube because the acting is great, whether
Yes,
or not you
phenomenal.
like the message. Um, and there's one point where the main character walks up to, I'm guessing, a lesser character, and then he says, you know, why am I more important than you? Because my watch costs more than your car. And you can see the person he's speaking to just shut down almost and feel this sense of fear. But if you set that today in like one of the movies, you're like, this character, I hate him. Who is this person speaking like this? And it just feels so out of place. And one more thing before I throw it over to you. So, as a high school teacher, obviously I'm interacting with younger students. And something I've noticed is firstly, they are noticeably more left wing, and they're also noticeably more politically active than I was. And maybe that's not strange because the younger generation tend to be left wing generally. They tend to be more anti hierarchy, anti structure. Makes sense because they're young. Um, but I do see this political awareness, and also with what you're saying about the economic system has screwed them because they can't own houses. There is another real fear that I see, which is the world is going to burn in 30, 40 years. So we need to change the system because I want to see a giraffe. I want to see a rhino. I want my children to see a hippopotamus or a koala. And I think that fear of climate change cannot be divorced from the economic system. And as long as this fear interweaves, I think art is and will keep moving that way, especially art from the younger generation.
Um, I mean, I'm glad the younger generation is more left. And when I was in high school, I was still, oof, I don't know. I think I read Alice Shrugged in grade 11, and by the time I got to college, I was watching like that scene from Always Be Closing, Ben Affleck's speech from the boiler room, and I was like, oh yeah, yeah, this is the stuff. Like I'm gonna make money. But yeah, so I'm glad, and I think if this is the way that's like once again, I think I am more left leaning than I was back then, and I'm just I guess I've nothing constructive, but I'm very very happy to hear that. And are your students watching this sort of stuff, consuming this sort of not just films, but also like TikToks and like these Twitter posts, I guess?
I think so because from what I know, and granted, I don't have TikTok, so there's a lot I don't know, but there seems to be a big Black Lives Matter movement there. Once again, I
Mm-hmm.
could be completely wrong, but I remember there was this one student that I had which was quite open in his support for Donald Trump. So this is in Australia. And to be honest, I guess my reaction was always like, well, if you want to be, I'm not going to like put you on detention. Like I just don't think I have that right. So if
Mm-hmm.
you make an argument and whatever, then okay, that's cool. But it seems like even when he was saying it, like, being quite openly for Donald Trump, there were other people in the class that I was just like, I guess, like, ugh, here we go again.
Right.
And I don't see the same, like, anti-feminist rhetoric that I did on in 2015, and that to me is pretty big. Like, people like Ben Shapiro, who have always been these little stars on the right wing, they
Hmm.
seem to be more and more replaced by left wing people or political commentators. And there was recently some just discussion or media talk about this left wing, like Hassan guy, who I've seen a few of his YouTube videos. He's the left wing guy and he just criticizes certain people and he speaks from the left. And he recently bought a house or something like that. So I guess what I'm just seeing in media is there is a move left. And I don't think the things like Snowpiercer and Parasite are just blips in the cultural consciousness. I do see a move that way, particularly with the climate change issue.
Okay. Okay. I think it's super interesting that climate change is also the top of mind. Maybe it's because you're in Australia where there's more, where I think there's like a big hole in the ozone layer above you guys, or
Yep.
and
Isn't that great?
yeah, and you guys have a lot more nature too, like, spiders the size of dinner plates. But like,
Wait. Can we wait? I'm gonna call timeout on that. See, this is such a ingrained cultural understanding about Australia. I was in Europe, and like the three things I heard was like, "Hey, do you ride kangaroos to school?" And the second thing is like, "I don't want to go to Australia because I know I'll be get eaten by a spider." And the third thing I heard was like, "Why don't you speak like Crocodile Dundee?" Like, these are the three things I heard over and over again. I've never seen a spider the size of a dinner plate. I've seen some pretty big spiders, but I'm pretty terrified of them as well. So just
okay,
repping the country. Um, some of
okay.
these stereotypes are a little exaggerated.
Well, next thing you'll be telling me drop bears aren't real.
Yeah, believe it or not.
But yeah, no, I just like I don't know, I just think it's super. It's like great that it's on the top of your mind, because as much as environmentalism is important, and I do recognize that as an issue, it just never really figured into my politics at all. I've always viewed as the environment being secondary to the people, and you know, who are we to say these developing nations to stop polluting, et cetera, et cetera. But once again, it's if we don't have the environment, we don't have anything going forward. So that first of all, I think was a big it's good to hear that people are concerned about the environment.
I think the term is actually climate anxiety, where there's
Okay.
this anxiety about what will happen in 10, 20, 30 years. And honestly, I feel like I have this. And I was teaching this geography class and I was just showing this clip of David Attenborough. And there was this clip in the documentary which showed the percentage of the world that was covered by rainforest.
Hmm.
And then it would jump forward 10, 20, 30 years. And then that percentage would go from 60 to 40. And then it jumped forward another like 20, 20, 30 years. And it goes down to like 25. And it's just terrifying because you know that there are some people who are profiting so much. And I would say even the things that the jokes online about Mark Zuckerberg, Zuck, and even Bezos, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's just me and I'm just wishful, but there seems to be a pushback against these figures. Not so much for Elon Musk, who it seems like the Libertarian Party and the right, even the left actually has like adopted him as some cultural icon, probably because he's associated with Dogecoin and he dates like a weird girlfriend musician. But it seems like with Bezos and with Zuckerberg and all these other people, there's like a general mistrust.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I don't know. I spent a lot of time, like, once again in my libertarian objectivism phase, worshiping Elon Musk as, like, as a Randian hero. He's just doing what people say he can't, and he's doing it well. And nowadays, even Musk, as well as of course everyone else, have just honestly, everyone got lucky. They're a product of the environment. I can't deny that they worked hard, but that they have this much money, it's definitely not purely their own labor. It's their labor exploiting everyone else's labor using a system that allowed that to compound. And once again, I don't necessarily think it's their fault as an individual. You can't hate the player. You have to blame the game, and there's something wrong
Mm-hmm.
with the system.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so I think that often I'll see hatred or vitriol directed at these individuals isn't necessarily. I don't necessarily think that's right. I think they could do well with giving. Like Mackenzie Bezos is doing well. She's actually given a lot of her wealth away. Yeah, I think it's like you mentioned, it's to do with the system, and it's people realizing that the system is broken.
Mm. And I guess why I wanted to talk about this was there's a fear of mine. There's part of me which is excited, which is we're producing more art, which obviously reflects a social consciousness, which criticizes an unfair economic system. So I'm very happy because of that. But there's also a part of me, and maybe we'll end with this. There's a part of me which is a little scared because Hollywood is so a part of that economic system. And part of me feels like, will Hollywood co opt these social messages of reform and economic change and do it in a way where they will just take the social credit, they will just take the allure of these movements, this moral high ground, without actually pushing for real change? And I think just seeing these two films win Best Pictures, part of me is like, wait, is there an actual move in cinemas around the world, cinema companies or environments to produce these films? And if so, will they remain true to the message? And I do think films like Parasite and even No Man's Land do genuinely criticize the system. So maybe I'm just being a little paranoid.
Now that once again, now that we're back to the idea of film as like a complex as an industry, have you seen Hail Caesar? It's a Coen Brothers film.
I have not. I've heard about it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's like all over the place, just Coen Brothers silliness. But there's this. Basically, the premise is that there's these communists in it's like set in like 1950s Hollywood, and there's these communists who are trying to infiltrate the studio system, and and I don't know. I prefer to see it in that sort of way, like that what it is that there are people with leftist political beliefs and who are choosing to use this industry, the apparatus of capitalism, to as their megaphone to get their message across. And yeah, that's what I want to believe.
Hmm. Well, hopefully we can get some of these films out there because I do think they have a message. And this recent wave and this recent move amongst some of the younger generation does give me hope that one day we'll put things like the environment and health above the economic system. So one can only hope, but to me, I do think we are moving in the right direction.
Awesome. And right now, my politics thinks so too. My politics are all over the place, but yes, right now I am in full accord.
Mm. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Chris, for jumping on and being the first repeat guest and just hearing me blabble. Honestly, this is just a thought that had been in my mind for a while, and I'm like, I need to speak about this with someone. So thank you for rolling with the punches and contributing.
Thanks for having me, Stanley. It's always a pleasure. It's always great talking to you.
All right, cool. We'll wrap it up. And to the audience, thank you once again for tuning in to Safety Last. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you later.
Thank you for tuning in to Safety Last with Stanley Ching. If you enjoyed this, then please leave a rating or a comment. I hope you're leaving with a new idea, and make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and other places that can be found in the description.